So here's a wild question for you. Did the ancient Phoenicians discover America? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but this idea actually comes from a fascinating, really detailed scholarly work from over a century ago. And today, we're going to dive right in. The very idea of it just seems impossible, right? I mean, we're all taught Columbus was the first European to make it to the Americas in 1492. But what if? What if another civilization, thousands of years earlier, had not just the skill, but a real reason to cross that vast, vast ocean? Now, this is not some modern internet conspiracy theory. The entire argument comes from a meticulously researched book written way back in 1909 by Thomas Crawford Johnston. And Johnston wasn't just some random guy with an idea. He was a seriously esteemed scholar, an honorary member of the Geographical Society of California, and known for his deep contributions to anthropology. And yeah, his work was taken seriously. The introduction to his book praises his keen reasoning powers and varied scholarship, basically telling people, hey, you need to actually listen to this guy. So you know what? That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to walk through his chain of argument piece by piece. Johnston's case starts by establishing what you might hear lawyers call means and opportunity. See, before he could even try to prove the Phoenicians did it, he had to first prove they could do it. And he argues they were, without a doubt, the absolute masters of the ancient seas. And as you can see here, their skill wasn't built overnight. It was this slow, systematic progression over centuries. They soaked up knowledge from Egypt, they learned to handle the stormy coasts of northern Europe, they were always pushing the boundaries. And then, by 1100 BC, they founded the city of Gades in Spain, which gave them a perfect launch pad, right onto the Atlantic Ocean. So the big takeaway here is that these weren't just guys sailing around the calm Mediterranean. They were a legitimate seafaring superpower. They could navigate by the stars, they built special ships just for long hauls, and they had access to both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. And get this, their ships were actually faster than many commercial sailing ships from the early 1900s. Just think about that for a second. And this slide just nails the point about their technology. You know, when we picture ancient ships, we usually think of those galleys with all the oars. But the Phoenicians had the Tarshish ship. This thing was like the long-haul truck of the ancient world. It was built for stability, for cargo, for a journey that could take years, not just a quick trip down the coast. Okay, so with their skills and technology established, Johnston moves on to the actual evidence. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. He lays out this trail of strange cultural clues, super specific customs that seem to just pop up in the Mediterranean, then thousands of miles away in Polynesia, and finally in America. What's so wild here is how specific these customs are. Johnston's whole point is that these can't just be coincidences. Why would scalping, these unique steam baths, tattooing for nobility, all things practiced by cultures who sailed on Phoenician ships, suddenly appear thousands of miles away in the Pacific and the Americas? But maybe the weirdest parallel of all is the practice of head flattening, artificially shaping an infant's skull as a sign of nobility. I mean, come on. For Johnston, the idea that such a strange and specific custom could independently pop up in both the Pacific and the Americas, well, it just stretched credibility way too far. Then he starts following the linguistic trail, pointing to these incredible echoes in place names. And this makes sense, right? Settlers are always naming new places after their old homes. The capital of Samoa is Apia. An ancient name for a part of Greece was also Apia. Tahiti might be named for a Scythian goddess. Johnston doesn't say these are absolute proof, but that they're all pieces of a much larger puzzle. So we followed this trail of clues all the way across the Pacific Ocean, and now Johnston brings his argument to its final destination, the American continent itself. At the very heart of his case is the legend of Votan. All across Central America, you find these ancient traditions about a white, bearded lawgiver who came from the east. But here's the kicker. His symbol was the serpent, and not just any serpent. It was the specific royal totem of King Hiram of Tyre, the most famous of all the Phoenician kings. Next, Johnston points to what he considers his smoking gun, this massive 24-ton stone monument. We all know it as the Aztec calendar stone, but Johnston makes the absolutely explosive claim that it's not a calendar at all. He argues it's a giant ceremonial mariner's compass. And his reasoning is based on what you can actually see on the stone. It has clearly marked cardinal points: north, south, east, and west. It has symbols for the four winds, and it's all carved with just stunning mathematical precision. For Johnston, this wasn't about tracking days. It was a national monument celebrating the very tool that made their incredible journey possible in the first place. All right, and now we arrive at the final, and frankly, the most audacious part of Johnston's entire argument. He doesn't just think the Phoenicians reached America. He thinks he knows what they called it. So, the Bible talks about this legendary land of riches called Ophir. The story goes that a joint fleet of King Solomon and the Phoenician King Hiram would sail from a port on the Red Sea, and they'd come back 3 years later, loaded with gold, silver, and all sorts of exotic stuff. For centuries, nobody has been able to figure out where Ophir actually was. Johnston pretty quickly dismisses all of usual suspects. Arabia? A land journey only took a couple of months, so a 3-year boat ride makes absolutely no sense. Africa? Well, trade was already happening there. The biblical description of the wealth from Ophir, especially silver becoming as common as stones in Jerusalem, it just pointed to a source of minerals on a scale nobody had ever seen before. And this leads to the jaw-dropping conclusion of his entire book, that 3-year journey from the Red Sea wasn't some slow crawl around the coast. It was an epic voyage across the entire Pacific Ocean, helped along by the trade winds. America, with its unimaginable wealth of gold and silver, was the biblical land of Ophir. And as if all that wasn't enough, Johnston leaves us with one final, stunning piece of evidence. It's a creation story from Polynesia, a direct stop on his proposed route. In the story, the first woman is made from a man's bone, or Evie. And what was her name? Evie, which is pronounced Eve. A clear, unmistakable echo of the book of Genesis, found in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Look, Thomas Johnston's theory is definitely not mainstream history, but his careful, methodical research, all these little pieces of the puzzle, it forced you to ask the question, what if the story we've all been told is missing a few chapters? What if human history is far stranger and much more connected than we ever dared to imagine?